This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia. Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by ItaliancitizenshipAssistance.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. How you doing, man?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And in today's episode, we wanted to talk a bit about the situation for individuals who could apply for Italian citizenship through the consulate outside of Italy or at the comune municipal offices inside of Italy. In some situations, a person may find that petitioning the courts could potentially be necessary, as well as something that helps for their process to move forward. But these are very specific circumstances that a person would be able to petition the courts if they are going to be applying for citizenship via Jure Sanguinis. But Marco, would you maybe mind explaining what these situations would look like for a person who may want to consider applying, or rather petitioning, through the courts?
First of all, let me say that petitioning the court to get Italian citizenship is something that is not unusual. And we've talked about this in other episodes, especially if you have a 1948 case. Let me start by saying that petitioning the court to get Italian citizenship is something that is not unusual. We talked about the necessity to go through the court system in Italy to obtain Italian citizenship if you are claiming citizenship through a female ancestor who gave birth to her child before 1948. So in that situation, applying for citizenship via the court system is a necessity because the law didn't allow women to pass citizenship to their children before 1948. So thanks to the legal precedent established by the Italian Supreme Court in 2009, it's now possible to obtain Italian citizenship via the court system when there is a female ancestor in your Italian line who gave birth to her child before 1948. And this is only possible from 2009, meaning that before, people who were in this situation were not able to get Italian citizenship at all. But today's episode is about a slightly different situation, meaning the situation of somebody who might want to consider petitioning the court, even if they have the ability to apply for citizenship through their consulate. So we're talking about somebody who doesn't have a 1948 case, so somebody who has a normal citizenship case where there is no female in the Italian line who gave birth to her child before January 1st, 1948. But this person lives in a jurisdiction that has a wait time that is longer than the maximum established by the law. It could be longer by 1 day, by 2 months, 4 months, or it could be a situation like we saw during the health emergency in the past couple of years, where a consulate was closed for a certain period of time. The point is, if you are unable to have the consulate help you with your citizenship application, if they're unable to take your citizenship application or unable to give you an appointment within a reasonable amount of time, which is by law within 730 days, then you become entitled to petition the court in Italy and pursue Italian citizenship through the court system. Of course, the person who lives within the jurisdiction of a consulate that has a wait time for an appointment longer than the one that the laws allows could also decide to relocate to Italy and use the Italian municipality where they relocate to apply for citizenship by descent. But of course, not everybody has the ability to relocate to Italy for the necessary time, meaning for the duration of the process, which could take 7 months. And we've talked about the process of applying for citizenship through an Italian comune several times in other episodes. So if you live within the jurisdiction of a consulate where the wait time exceeds the one established by the law, then you can petition the court to get Italian citizenship. And a lot of people ask us, okay, so what do? I petition the court, and then I have to go through the consulate again, or the court will maybe force the consulate to take my application, or how does that work? But the truth is that it's going to be the court itself that will gain basically power to decide your case and grant citizenship if you are entitled to citizenship. So, in short, if you have a case that you could present at the consulate in the jurisdiction where you reside, but the wait time exceeds the one established by the law, and of course, we're talking about quite rare situations in America because the wait time is much longer, for example, in South America. And that's why a lot of people from South America have to petition the court. But if you are in this situation, you can petition the court in Italy, and the court will grant you citizenship. Also, let's keep in mind that, and this is another common question, if you live within the jurisdiction of a consulate, you cannot apply through another consulate outside of your jurisdiction unless, of course, you relocate, because the consulate is going to ask you for proof of residency within the jurisdiction. They want to see your driver's license, your utility bills, your state ID. They want to make sure that you reside within their jurisdiction. But if you can relocate, or if you are relocating to another state where the wait time is within the maximum wait time allowed by the Italian law, then by all means you can do so. But if you have no way, no ability to relocate to another jurisdiction or to Italy for the time necessary for your application to be processed, then the only way to go could be to petition the court in Italy.
Interesting. So I guess just one quick clarification. I mean, it sounds like it's pretty much inferred here, but to clarify, like a 1948 case, the petitioner, doesn't have to physically be in the courtroom. In this type of situation, it sounds like that's also the case that Italian citizenship assistants could be in court on behalf of the individual who is petitioning for citizenship by descent directly through the court.
That's right. You will have to collect all your documents and give power of attorney to an attorney who will present your case in court. And the process will be basically identical to the process that somebody has to go through if they have a female ancestor. So if they have like a case known as a 1948 case. So the process is identical. You need an attorney. You will need a power of attorney signed and notarized, and your attorney will represent you in court. And there's no need for you to travel to Italy and be present in court before the judge or at any time during the process.
And so I guess just to go into this also, if someone elects to work with Italiancitizenshipassistance.com, what would a rough timeline look like for this process to take place? I mean, how do you prove, or do you have to prove that the consulate either won't take your appointment or that they can't do it within a timely manner, this 2-year period? What are the steps towards making this possible if somebody, for example, were to work with you guys?
That's a very good question. So there is basically an additional piece of documentary evidence that you have to provide to the court when going through a process like this. You have to show the court that the wait time in the place where you reside is longer than the one established by the Italian law. So the court knows that you have legal standing, and it could be like an appointment confirmation that is like more than 730 days in the future at the time in which you present your petition to the court. It could be an email from the consulate saying, I'm sorry, the wait time is this long, or I'm sorry, we can't help you. At this time, we are temporarily not taking new application. Anything that shows the court that you are unable to present your application in a timely manner at the consulate. And of course, we're talking about extreme situations where the consulate is really unable to help people, which doesn't happen in Northern America very often. But and we've seen situations where it happened. And also, I want to clarify that this might just happen for a period of time. For example, there was a few years ago a situation where the Los Angeles consulate was booking appointments for more than 730 days in the future. But then, and that went on for a couple of years, but then all of a sudden they became the quickest consulate in terms of giving out appointments. So you have to look at that specific moment in time where you would be ready to apply for citizenship by descent, but you're unable to do so in a timely manner. So that's what allows you to petition the court, and that what gives you legal standing. As for the other part of the question, how long does a process like this takes? Well, it depends on the court that you use. As some people will know, there was a change in the law in the past couple of months, and more precisely in June of 2022, when the Italian government stated that an applicant for Italian citizenship, or a petitioner, I should say, was no longer able to use the court of Rome unless their ancestor was from that area, and that it was necessary to use the local regional court in the area where the ancestor was born. So ultimately, I don't have a straight answer to your question because it depends on the court that you're using. And unlike before, when there was only one court, so we had data, now it's a little bit depending on the specific court and region that you have to use to apply for citizenship via the court system. And some courts are faster than others, some courts are slower. It also depends on how many judges are working in that specific court. So it depends on a variety of factors. Let's say that it's a process that on average could take between 6 and 14 months. But of course, I just would like to clarify that it really depends on the court, and we could see very quick processes in some courts and very slower processes in other courts.
That definitely makes sense. And thank you so much for clarifying all of those points. And kind of on this line of thought, just to kind of figure out what are the differences and what do you need to do. Are there any differences with the document or with the process, or maybe other things that you should take into consideration to see whether it is worthwhile to wait out the longer period of time, or if it's just makes more sense to pursue the courts?
In terms of documents, the same documents are pretty much necessary when you petition the court. So you have to get all the documents as if you were applying through the consulate. The only major difference is probably that the translations must be certified when you use your documents in an Italian court, whereas when you apply through the consulate, you can just go with regular plain translations that a translator can prepare, or that we at ICA prepare for our clients. But if you want to go through the courts, what we do for our clients, and what anybody has to do, is to get the translations certified. And how do you do that? So it's no longer sufficient to have the document and its translation, but you will also need the translation to be certified by an Italian clerk of the court, which doesn't necessarily have to be the same court that you're using to make your petition. Or you could get them certified in an Italian consulate, though the process tends to be a little bit slower if you go through the consulate to have your translations into Italian certified. The third option could be to have an Italian notary or an American notary certify the signature of the translators that has translated the documents. And basically what the translator will do is they will swear before the notary that the translations are faithful and accurate. Only in this situation, an Italian court is able to accept to review documents in foreign languages. Then another aspect that is worthwhile to take into consideration, if you're leaning towards petitioning the court in Italy because of the wait time, in the place where you reside abroad at the consulate could probably be to be careful when you have an Italian ancestor that you're claiming citizenship through that became naturalized while their child was a minor. And let's keep in mind that the adult age was 21 years old prior to 1975 under Italian law. So if you have an ancestor who became naturalized when the child was a minor, a consulate, a comune would 100% approve your application because the requirement under the Italian law is that the ancestor either never became naturalized or became naturalized when the child was already born. And that was the major interpretation also in the Italian courts. But we've touched on this subject before. Very recently, we have seen a few judges giving a different interpretation, which in my opinion is completely mistaken and far from what the law says, which would be that if the ancestor became naturalized when the child was still a minor, we're talking about the child born in America, because if the child was also born in Italy, then the ancestor's naturalization would have included the child. So the child would have become naturalized validly, and that would prevent you from getting Italian citizenship. But if the ancestor became naturalized when the child was a minor, the child born in the US was a minor, and you're going through the courts, a minority of judges in the Court of Rome, because that's where we filed all the petitions until June, a minority of judges started to argue that that would cause the loss of Italian citizenship for the child too, which is of course not what the law says, but nonetheless, it's what the judges came up with. And once again, it's a minority of judges. So we're talking about a smaller number of petitions that have been rejected due to this situation. Now, we do not know yet how the local regional courts will rule in these specific instances. They may or may not do the same thing that the Court of Rome was doing, so we don't know yet. It's too soon to say. But if you are considering petitioning the court, you might want to take that into consideration, that if you have an ancestor who became naturalized when the child was still a minor, you might find yourself in a situation where there is a judge who thinks the same as that minority of judges within the Court of Rome. But again, we're talking about a minority of judges and we're talking about the Court of Rome, so we don't know yet how the local regional courts will rule on this issue. Also, one last thing to keep in mind for people in this specific situation, meaning when there is an ancestor who became naturalized when the child was a minor under the law, under the Italian law, which would be if there is only one ancestor who became naturalized when the child was minor, but the other didn't because he or she became naturalized when the child was an adult or never became naturalized, then your chances of success go up considerably and go back to almost being 100%. So just make sure that you consider also what happened to the other ancestor if you have only one ancestor who became naturalized while the child was a minor.
Fascinating. And I'm just curious because we've spoken about this in regards to the 1948 cases when we were talking about Rome, but in the situation where somebody is petitioning a local court and maybe it comes out with an answer that would not be favorable, what would be the process from there? Is there any way to challenge that? If you do challenge that, does it get challenged and get thrown back to the same judge, or does it get thrown to a different court? What would that roughly look like in one of these local courts now?
So we're talking about the appeal process here. And of course, if your case gets rejected, you can appeal your case before the Court of Appeal, which would be in the same region where the lower court is located, and it would be a completely different court. So you would not be dealing with the same judge. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because maybe I should have added this before, but when we were dealing with the Court of Rome prior to June of 2022, For that minority of cases that was rejected because of the naturalization of the ancestor while the child was still underage, well, the majority of those cases were overturned by the Court of Rome. So it does seem like it was really a wrong interpretation of the law that was going on in the lower court, because the Court of Appeal basically overturned almost all of those cases.
And so also just one other thing that just kind of taking it back to prior episodes, we've mentioned how applying for Italian citizenship by descent in Italy versus applying in the States may give you a little bit of a difference in some of the documents that you may need, just regarding some of the non-line relatives. What would it be in this case? Do you need those non-line relatives documents, or would it be the same as applying in Italy in general, where that's not a necessity?
Let me say, before I answer that question, there is a law that regulates what documents you need to present when applying for citizenship by descent. And that law was made by the ministry, the Italian ministry. And that very law states that only the documents for the individuals in your Italian line are necessary, which is why when you apply in Italy, most municipalities, they only require the documents for the individuals in the Italian line. On the contrary, when you apply through a consulate, most of the consulates in America will also want the birth certificates, the death certificates for the individuals that are not in the Italian line but are married to the individuals in the Italian line. And that's because they want to be extra cautious. They want to verify all the information and cross-reference all the information just to make sure that you're presenting the right documents for the individuals in the Italian line. When you go through the courts to get citizenship, you can bring any amount of documents that you believe can support your case. So there is nothing in the law that says which documents you need to present. Most people, and that's what we advise all of our clients to do, they present only the documents for the individuals in the Italian line, which are the documents that at a minimum are necessary. But if you feel safer by presenting extra documents, you can do so. It's just not necessary. It's probably not going to make any difference. But if you have maybe some information on the documents that doesn't completely match, you might want to consider getting extra documents and presenting the court with extra documents to confirm that the documents for the individuals in the Italian line are really pertaining to those individuals.
Well, that's great to know. Thank you so much for clarifying that point. And also thank you so much for taking the time to go through this and to go over all of these points to really give a great overview of what things could look like for that person who would want to petition the court for their Italian citizenship, Jure Sanguinis. But if anybody is needing help with this or any other way of applying or petitioning or pursuing Italian citizenship, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, Italiancitizenshipassistance.com, or give us a call. The number is on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if anybody is interested in more content like this about Italian citizenship, moving to Italy, and anything about the practical process of how you go through that legally, make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel as well as the audio-only podcast. But of course, if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, you are also automatically subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast, where Marco and I also go into the topics about Italian real estate, renting, buying. We've also done a series on some of the different places that we each like and would consider living in. And so be sure that you're subscribed for all of that. But then, of course, also, if you're interested in any content about life abroad, living abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat, be sure to come over to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, or you can also find the audio-only podcast on your favorite podcasting platforms through the title, Not Your Average Globetrotter, but of course, Mr. Marco Permunian from Italiancitizenshipassistance.com. Thank you so much for making yourself available. Of course, I am also Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.